get started then. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Terrance Weinzierl. I am, you can find me online at Terrance on Twitter and Instagram and stuff, so feel free to say hi or send me a question later if it comes up. I'm a type designer, which means that I design typefaces and build fonts. So I'm not a game designer. So that's kind of my disclaimer, is that the stuff I'm going to talk about today is my opinions and my observations about video games and typography in them. So I work for a company called Monotype, and that's where I work. But Monotype is known for designing user interface typefaces. So our famous projects are Seago for Microsoft, as seen on the Xbox. And then we've done a lot of stuff for Google, too, like Open Sans and some interface fonts for Android and stuff before they switched to Roboto or Chrome OS fonts. We also recently designed a typeface for Sony called SST, which is used on the PS4 and in the PlayStation Store on PS3 too. Pretty cool. My recent claim to fame actually is custom fonts for Domino's, and they use this set of fonts for branding and packaging and advertising and stuff. So that was fun. But I actually spoke at the GDC before in 2012. I spoke about localization, and I was really surprised that I got good grades, and they put me on the deck of cards. So I hope that my sequel today will be just as good. So don't forget to fill out the evaluation things. I've done a few custom fonts for video games, of course. I did this one for a skateboarding game, and I've done this one for a racing game. But I've been a casual gamer for 2/3 of my life. So this intersection of typography and video games is my jam. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm glad you came with me. So. That's what I'm here to talk about today, how to choose the best typographic system for your global game. So I'll talk about a couple different things, the mood and style of typefaces. I'll talk a little bit about how to use typography in a game, and then I'll talk a little bit about anticipating or dealing with localization stuff and kind of how that relates to fonts. So I have good news and bad news. There's no exact science to choosing typefaces. Much of it is instinct and gut feeling, and part of it is knowing what might work with the content and context. It's a skill that will improve with experience. The more you do it, the better you get. So ask yourself, how does the type feel? Is it slow? Is it fast? Is it light? Is it heavy? Think about the images that will accompany the text or the objects, places, time periods, or attitudes. What typefaces would your characters use if they had to choose? In a game like Far Cry 3, the distress and static of the type describes the insanity and the instability of the antagonist. And they use quotes from Alice in Wonderland as a metaphor for his descent into madness. So we have a gritty, broken world that you're in. And if you notice, there's a little icon in the corner there of like a mirror image of guns. It looks like a butterfly. And so that fits with this tropical island world that they're in. And they use this as a design element throughout the game. They have a mirror image of the guns here, or even how they treat the type, too. So they have the type mirrored from the center. And I thought that was just a really good repeating design element. Perhaps you have a story like Battlestar Galactica. You have this type style that's futuristic. A geometric sans serif is almost a given for the side of a spaceship. But the people in the story are also greatly influenced by tradition and antiquity or Greek mythology. So here, they're using the shape of a Greek delta for the A, which is a nice twist. So maybe the people in the story are so influenced by ancient Greece that they incorporate the Greek alphabet somehow. And I think a detail like this can add a richness to the story and the experience of the game. Your 12-year-old player will still be able to read it, but your 30-year-old college graduate player is going to delight in the detail. So classifications and time periods are origin points that help us describe and organize type. These are genres of typefaces, but they're also not cut and dry. So there's a lot of exceptions and overlaps, just like music or video games. Knowing the main genres and descriptors can help you choose fonts by giving you a starting point. And there are a lot of books and resources on the topic and stuff. I have some recommended resources on my blog, too, if you look it up. But just like games and music, there's exciting things that happen in between the genres. Of course, there's a rich history to type. And even long before Gutenberg and the first printed books, organizing type as we know it today with paragraphs and punctuation, developed over hundreds of years with calligraphy in manuscripts. And those traditions were, soaked into printing, because that's what people were used to reading. There's actually a game that will teach you about typographic history, and while you play it, it's called Typewriter. And it's a platformer where you're using a little bit of punctuation, like a car colon thing, and you run and jump through puzzles and props in this typographic and pretty historically accurate world. A little European modernism here. Pretty sweet. I don't have enough time to go into all of the genres and stuff in depth today, but I wanted to zoom in on a few. So back in the day, this style was called grotesque in Europe and Gothic in the Americas. And like Helvetica and Trade Gothic, for example. And there are some differentiators between a grotesque and a Gothic, but it's pretty scientific. They're like fraternal twins, if you think about it that way. It's definitely the most popular genre in the last 50 years. But there's no such thing as a neutral typeface, though. I wanted to emphasize that. There's only common ones. So these feel neutral because we see them so often. They kind of disappear because they're so common, not because they are inherently neutral. So everything, no matter how plain it seems, carries some connotation with it. A humanist sans serif kind of has a little bit more handwriting influence to the shapes, less mechanical. And they're very popular with corporations and branding because they look clean and efficient and friendly, something like Gill Sans or Myriad, for example. Geometric sans are, as they're described, geometric. They can be very elegant or futuristic. And there's also a pretty wide range of geometric moods. Square sans is futuristic and mechanical too, like Paint Gothic on Call of Duty and movie posters, a typeface like Euro style. Very popular on cars, as we'll see later. Serif typefaces have their own serious and bookish look, or when used in games, historical or classical. Final Fantasy, for example, feels cinematic. Or a newer game, 1886, The Order, has a very bookish and cinematic feel, too, with the use of serifs. And slab serifs on the bottom there are, of course, popular with cowboys and sports. Script typefaces, again, have a bunch of their own subgenres, and there's a pretty big variety of those, too. But they can look luxurious or formal, or very informal, like handwriting. most commonly in the game world is casual scripts and really comic book lettering styles, very popular. But typefaces can help set the mood and the tone of voice. But they can also be very flexible depending on the content and the context. But it really breaks down to these formal qualities and also stereotypes. And these stereotypes are developed over a long period of time because they get used over and over again. So this looks sci-fi because we've seen those type styles used in so many sci-fi things. It's okay, it makes sense. It's not a bad thing, it's just a thing. Lord of the Rings, kind of this fantasy style with a calligraphy called Uncial. And we see these typographic stereotypes everywhere, not just games, right? Police cars, a pizza place, right? Or whipped cream. So, these stereotypes act as a visual shortcut for our memory, and we recognize patterns. So we're able to guess the content based on the typography, or at least get a clue. So this is essential graphic design. This is communicating an idea visually. That's what typefaces are good at. So, see what I did there? Okay. Tiny Wings is a simple game, and the menu is pretty atmospheric, but the type style is a perfect match for the character and the style of the game, right? Round, soft, fluffy. This, along with the color and the music choices, gives this game a sophistication to an otherwise a simple mechanic, but they're just using one typeface. Pretty simple. Kingdom Rush, as another example, has a consistent franchise and brand typography. When I flip through these, you can kind of see the similarities. It's funny, it gets crazier. This is the first one. And then the last one is just a lot more, it just gets crazy. But this title is actually, lettering, not a font, of course. It's, drawn by hand there. But it looks like Saturday morning cartoons with this chunky, bouncy sans serif style. This could be a package of sugar cereal. I love it. The focus, though, is very much on the illustrations, and type is just a detail in their illustrations. The style, the type style is integrated and harmonious. And on the map, we actually have multiple typefaces. And again, the type is just a detail in their illustrations. But even in gameplay, they use little animations of onomatopoeias that float off of the action. It's comic book DNA. In a game like Portal 2, they use a typeface called Univers, which is exemplary of the grotesque genre, like I mentioned, similar to Helvetica. And it looks medical and corporate here. And it's contrasting with this torn-up world that they're in. And it's accented with airport-style iconography, which is in tune with the style of the type. So we can actually use these two design principles here to help us direct our typeface choices, harmony or contrast. In a game like Device 6, it's a puzzle game, kind of mashed up with a book. I'm kind of doing crops here, not one-for-one screenshot. But the serif typeface and that cream paper-like background is very intentional to make it look like a book. If this were a white sans serif on a black background, for example, it would feel very, very different. So typography is literally a main character in this game. But even if type is more of a supporting role, and that's kind of the usual cases, you still want it to be the best supporting role. The detailed audio and the parallax scrolling in the game contrast nicely with the otherwise pretty flat reading experience. In Splinter Cell Conviction, the type melds with the environment here. And so it's not merely a necessity that's tacked on top of the image, but a design element that's considered and integrated to harmonize. And this approach has, an augmented reality feel to it. and aids the player so they don't have to dig through the menus to know what the objectives are. Grid, racing game, a perfect example of harmony, too. The typefaces that they use are very popular with real cars, Eurostyle, and Futura. So the realism goal is supported by the typeface choices. And this 3D menu mimics the modeling and the lighting of the cars. So it's integrated into the world. It's big and loud, but it blends right in. Assassin's Creed is using that kind of style contrast here, similar to Portal 2, for example. And you have this, another gritty, textured world, and it's contrasted with a clean-cut humanist sans serif here that looks very much like a modern UI. And you might expect an old world, stereotypical typeface in a menu in a game like this, but we're surprised by the opposite. A couple more there. Okay, so let's look at a couple of mechanics. Legibility versus readability. Legibility is being able to differentiate one letter from the next, like an eye exam at the optometrist, right? Readability is more about comfort. You read best what you read most. For example, OCR is legible, but not very comfortable to read. Sans serifs are usually easy to read for short periods of time, and serif typefaces are easiest to read in long form, like a book. But when we look at typefaces that are designed for user interfaces, or just OSs, we see that most of them are humanist sans serifs, actually, and some disputed grotesques like Helvetica in there and stuff. But striking similarities. I realized that an OS needs to be a lot more bland than a game does, but it's very interesting to see patterns. So when we take a closer look at readability, we see that type size, the contrast, and the viewing distance are really important factors. And by contrast, I mean the difference between the text color and the background color, different than the sort of style contrast I was talking about a minute ago. And often a complaint with type is the usage. It's too small, it's too big, it's too thin, too heavy. But just when in doubt, remember that comfort is king. And we see a lot of discussion around viewing distance with responsive web design and changing typography for different screens and the reading scenarios that they suggest. So you can ask yourself, is the text comfortable to see and read at this distance? And it can help to get fresh eyes on it, too. I know if you're working on a game for months and months, it might be good to ask someone who hasn't seen it, is this comfortable to read? And part of the challenge is this device proliferation and the quality of screens on different devices, and then managing the content for all those screens, right? This is the challenge of the 21st century typographer and designer. You've seen this scenario where a phone game is scaled up to a tablet without any design changes, and it looks horsey, right? The buttons and the type are huge, or vice versa with a tablet game. That's been scaled down to a phone, and you have tiny type and tiny buttons. So typography is very size sensitive. Hierarchy, another mechanic, creating contrast between levels of importance. And this is kind of the idea between headlines and text sizes. Every magazine, everything with type uses hierarchy. And this lets you scan for the information that you want. For example, we have an exercise game, EA Sports Active. A rounded humanist sans serif is friendly and serious, but not harsh. Size, color, proximity to the icons is creating the hierarchy here. Pretty simple. A first-person shooter like Borderlands 2 usually has a complex inventory and menu system. There's a lot going on here. Tabs, icons, maybe 4 or 5 different sizes, type sizes. But they have a nice hierarchy with the brightness and the contrast and all of the blues with the yellow highlights. Essentially a really beautiful spreadsheet. Even more typographically complex, something like civilization has, a range of problems to solve. It becomes a balancing act of showing enough relevant information without, without clouding the gameplay. Only one typeface, though, not even a bold, but they use a lot of color coding for the hierarchy and clarity. Again, another beautiful spreadsheet. A pitfall to look out for would be information overload, like a pinball table. Everything is the same size, the same contrast, they're using every color. Maybe this helps distract you so that you miss the ball and you have to put more quarters in. So, I guess you can use confusion and panic to your advantage as a game designer, I suppose, or to get more quarters. The most commonly overlooked typographic detail I see is kerning and its cousin tracking, also known as letter spacing in CSS. But letter spacing is a generic term. Kerning or tracking could be described as letter spacing. I see some smiles, so that's good. We're kerning fans. Kerning is the adjustment between two letters, just two. And that's why they call it a kerning pair. You can have positive or negative kerning values, and these values, as they're added by a type designer like myself, are stored inside the font file. Some apps like Photoshop or Illustrator would allow you to manually override those default kerning values. Tracking, on the other hand, is the adjustment between all of the letters, positive or negative in the same way. The font has a default spacing built in at 0 here, and the app that's using the font can adjust it, like, for instance, by adding 200 units between each default value. So negative tracking usually does more harm than good, as you can see on the top. One metaphor to help with spacing is to think about the area or the volume between the letters, filling up with water. So you want them to be as even as possible. So it's not about measuring one extreme point to the next, but it's about balancing the negative space between the letters. Here's a couple of real-world examples. I don't mean to pick on anybody, right? We're all friends, so just constructive criticism. But just a little nitpick in Plants vs. Zombies. It's pretty mild, barely noticeable. Maybe I'm hypersensitive to it, but there's just a couple little gaps there. And also Call of Duty in this word multiplayer here. So what's going on is actually the lack of kerning is exaggerated by the negative tracking. So it's not just indie games, right? But big budget games too. So my point is that good typography is about the perceived quality of the game. It's packaging in a way. It's part of the packaging, and the typography is part of that whole experience of the game. So a little bit about localization and how fonts relate to localization. When you see the phrase Latin in font packaging, they're talking about the official name of our alphabet, not necessarily the language of the Roman Empire, but that's what it's named after. So that's why sometimes it's just called Roman. That's the origin. Many languages use Latin, English, French, Spanish, German, all of them, some with accents. Accents are called diacritics sometimes. So even a font with a modest range of accents can cover languages of millions of people in Europe and the Americas. Greek is a smaller part of the European market, but it has its own alphabet as well. There's a script called Cyrillic, which is used for Russian and some others around Western Europe there. And these three scripts, Latin, Greek, and Cyrillic, as you can see on the left there, they're all kind of similar in size and read from left to right. But, of course, that's not always the case with other languages around the world. Hebrew and Arabic, for example, read from right to left. And so there are extra challenges or specific challenges for localization with any one of those different writing systems, especially when they don't fit with our Latin model. Forgive me if this says anything bad or dirty. I just kind of popped a couple of those things in there, so forgive me. But these are also they're all 72 point. So when you're designing with another language, the type size is not necessarily a one-for-one match with other scripts. So my point being here is that if you know in advance the game is going to be translated, you'll want to leave, design your assets to leave a little bit of room above and below the letters to make room for these accents. Okay. A little bit about character sets. Running out of time, so I might have to power through. But there's usually packaged in different ways. I wanted to show a couple acronyms. STD is short for standard, which is usually the smallest available retail package. Pro has more, Com has more. They're just different sizes and ultimately different language support. You might have a font, for instance, that has Greek and Cyrillic and Latin all designed to match in the same font file. It might be packaged as WGL, W1G, or something like Pan-European. And that would cover, almost all of Europe. China is a hot topic, so I wanted to mention these. SC for Simplified Chinese, or TC for Traditional Chinese. With Simplified Chinese, it might be packaged as PRC, which stands for the People's Republic of China, China's official name. Or with Traditional Chinese is HK for Hong Kong. And I believe those are, it's with the regional preferences, right? So in a way, you could also have, say, for example, a simplified Chinese font that has just standard Latin packaged with it, or something like, I'm just giving you examples of how it's kind of a little bit modular, where you can package different language coverage together. Licensing and cost is always a big question. So it's hard to talk about it, but let's just pretend fonts are coffee for a second. Free fonts can have pitfalls, and like missing kerning or punctuation, or they might be free for personal use but not for distribution. Some free fonts are designed by professionals, however. There's some good open source fonts. But just be aware of who you're getting it from, and check the license to see what you can and cannot do with it. And fonts are valuable pieces of software, just like games. So piracy is a problem in the font world too. Commercial fonts are almost always of higher quality and consistency. Like a branded cup of coffee, you usually get what you pay for. Custom fonts are actually more common than you might think. You can check out a blog like Brand New, for example, and they talk a lot about about branding and stuff, and you'll see just how frequent that is. Custom fonts can sometimes be more expensive, but you get exactly what you want. So here's just an example of a custom font. It was just Latin to begin with, and they added Greek and Cyrillic to ship it to more markets. And they also added these platform-specific icons to it. So scalable vector assets inside the font. And we see this on the web frequently too, with icon sets and within a font. So almost all type foundries will do custom fonts, and there are both AAA and indie size type foundries. So contact your favorite type designer or whoever, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer questions about their fonts or help you pick something if you're stuck or whatever. So the recap, we talked about mood and the style of the typefaces, stereotypes, using harmony or contrast with the rest of your game. Talked a little bit about readability, hierarchy, and spacing specifics. and then how fonts relate to localization and packaging and cost. So that's the show for today. Thank you.